No one noticed when the dishwasher entered the boardroom, until he pointed at a $100 million drone design and said, "That'll fail." Laughter followed. But when the CEO's face changed, the whole room froze. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin. The boardroom was built like a temple: glass walls, panoramic skyline views of Seattle, and polished white floors so clean they reflected the shoes of billionaires. There were 25 people inside, 25 of the most powerful minds in aerospace tech, and none of them expected what was about to happen. "You're looking at the future of autonomous delivery," said Nolan Graves, the lead engineer, as he tapped his laser pointer against a sleek rendering on the massive wall screen. "This drone can carry up to 60 pounds and travel 200 miles without recharging." Polite claps followed. The investors nodded, sipping $30 espressos, their eyes half glazed from 5 hours of technical jargon. At the head of the table sat Claudia Renner, mid-40s, elegant, intimidating, and CEO of Renner Dynamics. She hadn't blinked in 10 minutes. Just then, the door creaked. A man stepped in, unnoticed at first. He was tall, early 40s, broad-shouldered, with sun-worn skin and gray smudges on his jeans. His name tag read Dean. His navy polo shirt was a size too big, sleeves rolled up, revealing rough forearms. His sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished tile. "Excuse me," he said. Calm, not loud, but firm. The room turned. Some furrowed brows. One junior analyst whispered to another, "Is that the janitor?" Dean raised a calloused hand and pointed directly at the projection. "That design's gonna fail," he said. Silence. For a moment, the only sound was the buzz of the HVAC system. Graves laughed, awkward and high-pitched. "Sorry, who are you?" Dean didn't blink. "I wash dishes in the basement cafeteria." More laughter. One investor smirked. "You're in the wrong room, buddy." Claudia didn't laugh. Instead, she narrowed her eyes. "Why do you say it'll fail?" she asked, voice quiet and sharp. Dean stepped forward, past the stunned executives. "The stabilizers are too far back. It shifts the center of gravity. Throw in a 40-knot headwind, and that drone's flipping mid-air, especially over uneven terrain." A few engineers exchanged glances. "Sir," Graves scoffed, "we've run over 800 simulations." "I've seen your simulations," Dean interrupted. "They don't include coastal updrafts or urban canyon effects. I've modeled those. They'll break this bird." "How would you know that?" Claudia asked, still watching him like a hawk. Dean exhaled. "I worked as a systems engineer in the U.S. Air Force. Focused on vertical lift UAVs. 12 years. Designed a carrier drone that got adopted by the Navy before a defense contractor stole the credit." Silence again. Real silence this time. Dean reached for a napkin off the coffee tray, pulled a pen from behind his ear, and walked to the side table. His hand moved fast. Arcs, angles, distribution diagrams. He didn't hesitate. It looked like muscle memory. He slid the napkin to Claudia. "This fixes it," he said. 20% better stability. Cuts energy draw. Less risk. And if you reroute the payload core, you can increase capacity without affecting the wind drag." Graves leaned over. His lips parted. "Wait, this could save us, what, $20 to $30 million in R&D. The CFO did a double take. "Closer to 50. One of the investors leaned back, eyes wide. "Are you telling me the dishwasher just redesigned our flagship drone?" Dean just stood there, hands in his pockets. Calm, not smug. Claudia slowly folded the napkin, like it was a sacred scroll. Then she turned to her assistant. "Get R&D down here. Now." She looked at Dean again. "Mr. Walker, you're not going back to the kitchen." Dean stood still as the room buzzed into motion. Claudia snapped commands like lightning. "Nolan, run the design through testing. Compare projections. Drew, pull up Dean Walker's employment file. And, actually no, give me his entire background." Dean shifted awkwardly as security guards hovered by the door. He'd been in rooms like this before, long ago. Back when his title said lead systems analyst and not dishwasher level 2. But back then, he had a wedding band, a house, a military pension on the horizon. All of it gone now. "You okay?" a young assistant whispered. Dean didn't answer. His gaze flicked toward the window, where the skyline glimmered beyond the glass. It didn't feel real. He thought his daughter, Sophie, 12, bright-eyed, and way too smart for the 5th grade. She thought her dad worked in a cool tech building. She didn't know he scraped plates in silence every night, saving up for her braces. Then Claudia spoke again. "Dean, you're coming with me." She walked to the glass elevator like it was an order. Dean hesitated, then followed. As the doors closed, the boardroom behind them buzzed louder than ever. No one even touched the coffee tray. The elevator hummed upward. Claudia didn't speak at first. Then she glanced sideways. "You designed drones for the Navy." Dean nodded slowly. "In disaster relief. Stabilization frameworks. I worked with DARPA for a while. Then I filed a patent for a modular delivery harness for remote medevac." He stopped himself. Claudia raised a brow. "And I submitted it while doing contract work," Dean said, his voice heavier now. "The company filed it under their name the same week. Lawyers said I didn't have the leverage to fight back. Lost my job a month later. Lost everything else not long after that." Claudia looked at him for a long time. "So you took a dishwasher job here?" Dean chuckled dryly. "You were hiring. Full-time. Healthcare. Close to Sophie's school. Sophie. My daughter. I raise her alone." The elevator chimed. Top floor. Claudia stepped out. Instead of the executive suite, she led him into a quiet conference room overlooking the Puget Sound. It was warm, minimalist, and completely private. "Sit," she said. Dean did. She poured 2 glasses of water. "Look, I know what it feels like to be underestimated. I was the only woman on a DARPA leadership panel once. They thought I was there to serve coffee." She slid the napkin sketch back to him. This isn't a fluke. I want to know what else you've got." Dean hesitated. He looked around the room, then slowly pulled out a folded file from his backpack. Notes, diagrams, and designs scribbled over months on cafeteria napkins, grocery receipts, even one on a cereal box flap. Claudia blinked. "Are these yours?" He nodded. "Stuff I never got to build. Didn't have the tools. Or the time." She took a long breath. "You're not going back downstairs." Dean stiffened. "What does that mean?" Claudia gave a rare, sincere smile. "It means I'm hiring you. Full-time. R&D advisory consultant. Benefits. Your own team. Once we evaluate this portfolio, you'll be paid what you're worth." Dean swallowed hard. He'd imagined this moment, but never like this. Not after the humiliation, the failure, the years of second-guessing. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then Claudia added, "One condition." He looked up. "Train one person from the janitorial or kitchen staff every quarter. Someone with potential. You clearly had it. Maybe they do too." Dean's throat tightened. He blinked twice, then nodded. "Deal," he said. And just like that, a single father who'd spent 3 years in silence, scrubbing dishes in a building full of billionaires, became the man who might save the company from collapse. Dean walked into the R&D wing wearing borrowed dress shoes. They didn't fit. Neither did the lanyard labeled Engineering Consultant Dean Walker that bounced awkwardly against his chest as every head turned. Most were polite nods, some were confused frowns, and 1 or 2 were unmistakably annoyed glares. Especially from Nolan Graves. The same lead engineer from the boardroom now stood stiff-backed near a holographic projection of the drone Dean had redesigned. His jaw tightened when Dean approached. "So," Nolan said, voice tight, "we're hiring from the cafeteria now." Dean didn't rise to it. "I guess we are." One of the interns smirked, but Claudia's assistant, Amanda, stepped in. Dean's design just passed all 32 wind tunnel tests. Headquarters in Zurich already approved Phase 2 prototyping. Silence. Dean turned to the team. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here because I've been watching this company do great things, and I want to help make sure they actually work." He dropped his backpack gently on the table, pulled out a yellow folder. "Here's a design I sketched a year ago. A dual-thrust vertical lifter with retractable arms. Could be used for search and rescue drops in tight terrain." Claudia stepped into the room just as he laid out the blueprint. Her eyes scanned the sketch. "Run this through simulation. Now." Nolan's lip twitched. "We're not ready." "I didn't ask," Claudia said, slicing the air with a single look. Nolan turned, stung, and walked to the terminal. Dean let out a slow breath. Being in this room felt like standing in a minefield, every step uncertain. But he wasn't here for their approval. He was here for Sophie. That night, he picked her up from school. She ran up to him, backpack bouncing, ponytail swinging, her cheeks red from the cold. "Dad, you're wearing fancy shoes." He grinned. "They hurt. Want to go get milkshakes?" Sophie nodded and grabbed his hand. They sat in a tiny diner near their old apartment, one where they used to split fries and quietly count coins to afford a grilled cheese. But tonight, Dean ordered 2 burgers, fries, and shakes. No counting. Sophie's eyes widened. "Is this okay?" He nodded. "We're okay now." Then his phone buzzed. A message from Claudia. "Design just got green-lit for federal pilot program. We'll discuss salary structure tomorrow. Also, your napkin is framed in my office." Dean smiled, but it didn't last long. The next morning, Dean entered his new workspace and froze. A package sat on his desk. No name. No note. Just a plain white box. He opened it. Inside was a broken drone stabilizer blade. The same one he criticized in the meeting. The same flawed part. Taped to it was a yellow sticky note. "Stay in your lane, dishwasher." Dean stared at it for a long time. Not angry. Not scared. Just tired. But when Claudia saw it later that day, she didn't hesitate. She walked into the engineering bay, held the broken blade up, and said, "If this is a joke, you're fired. If it's a threat, you're sued. If you're jealous, be better." Then she slammed it in the trash. Dean didn't say anything. But later, he stopped by the kitchen, asked Martha, the 60-year-old woman who trained him as a dishwasher, if her nephew still drew blueprints on napkins. She nodded. "Tell him to bring them tomorrow," Dean said. "We've got a program now." That night, Dean tucked Sophie into bed. She looked up at him, eyes half closed. "Do you like your new job, Daddy?" Dean thought for a moment. "I like what I get to build." Then he kissed her forehead and whispered, "And I like what I get to protect." 3 weeks later, the boardroom was a battlefield again, but this time, Dean wasn't just a guest. He stood at the head of the table, clean shave, fitted charcoal button-up, no longer blending in, yet still feeling like a stranger in the empire he'd helped build from the basement. Behind him, the screen displayed a live feed, one of his drone prototypes hovering perfectly in harsh winds near the Oregon coastline. Rescue dummy lowered, success logged. Investors clapped. Claudia nodded. Dean didn't smile, because what was really on the screen wasn't what was shaking him. It was what he found this morning, an unsigned printed contract in his file cabinet with his name on it. One clause highlighted in red. All designs, concepts, frameworks, and derivatives submitted by employee Dean Walker shall be considered property of Renter Dynamics, present and future. It was dated the day after Claudia promoted him. It wasn't in the paperwork he signed, and it wasn't her handwriting. Dean took the elevator to the legal floor. He sat across from Kyle Maddox, the firm's internal counsel. Young, slick, the kind of guy who polished his LinkedIn more than his ethics. Dean slid the contract forward. "This wasn't included in my onboarding packet." Kyle smirked like he'd been caught shoplifting and didn't care. "It's just standard protection. For the company's IP. It's illegal." Kyle didn't blink. "Do you have a copy signed by you?" Dean clenched his jaw. "It has my name, but not your signature." Dean stood up. "I want this removed. Immediately." Kyle gave a half smile. "That's not your call." Dean turned to leave. "Oh, and Dean," Kyle called, "next time you design something brilliant, maybe keep it to yourself." That night, Dean couldn't sleep. He sat on the apartment balcony, knees pulled up, wind blowing cold through his thin hoodie. Sophie was asleep inside, clutching her stuffed rabbit. He looked at his hands. Calloused, burned, weathered. These hands had saved lives. Fixed machines in sandstorms. Changed diapers in the dark. Wiped tears off his daughter's cheeks. Now those same hands are being used. Again. But he wasn't the same man anymore. He picked up his phone and made a call. To someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "You still in San Diego?" Dean asked. The voice on the other end, deep, gruff, familiar. "I am. Still run that vet startup legal firm." "Yeah. Dean, I need help." 2 days later, Claudia found a legal injunction on her desk. A formal filing. From Dean Walker, citing unauthorized IP assignment, fraud, and coercion. With federal documentation of all his original concepts, sketched before he ever stepped into Renter's building. She called him to the executive suite immediately. He walked in with no fear in his step. "You filed this without telling me?" Claudia asked. No venom, just quiet shock. Dean nodded. "Check the clause date. It's not yours. I know your ethics. That was someone else." Claudia tapped her pen against the table. Kyle, or someone working for him. Either way, I'm not backing down. She leaned back. You could destroy this company. Dean's voice was steady. I'm trying to save it. Like I always have. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and stared down at the city. My father started this company with one goal, to lift people like you. Dean's face didn't soften. Then someone forgot that. Claudia turned. I want to offer you something. He didn't answer. She slid a folder across the table. Dean opened it. Executive Partner Track. Equity Offer. Autonomy. A new title. VP of Innovation and Integrity. And a list of 3 names, including Kyle Maddox, with a red X over them. Already fired, Claudia said. And your designs? Already legally returned to you. With a binding guarantee. Dean looked at her, surprised. You filed first, Claudia said, folding her arms. That told me everything I needed to know. Then, softer, thank you for not leaving. Most people would have. Dean stood. Most people don't have a 12-year-old depending on them. Later that night, Dean stopped by the kitchen one last time. Martha was there, wiping down trays. She gasped when she saw him in his new coat and boots. He hugged her tightly, then reached into his satchel and pulled out an envelope. What's this? She asked. A scholarship. For your nephew. Full ride. Engineering school. Paid for by a foundation we're building, named after Sophie's mom. Martha teared up, shaking her head. Dean, no. You've done too much. I haven't done nearly enough, he said. He walked home that night under a quiet sky. The kind of sky that used to mock him. Now it felt like it was listening. The dishwasher had finally built something no one could take. Not a drone. Not a design. Not a paycheck. But respect. The conference room buzzed louder than ever. 2 months had passed since Dean's quiet revolt changed everything. Renter Dynamics had doubled in value, landed a Department of Defense drone contract, and their humanitarian drone fleet, built off Dean's napkin sketch, had just been deployed to disaster zones in 3 countries. But that morning, the sky over Seattle turned gray. Not because of rain, but because of what happened inside that boardroom. Dean stood at the front again. No projection, no schematics. Just one photo on the giant screen behind him, his daughter, Sophie, holding a toy drone he built for her. I was told not to speak today, Dean said quietly, staring at the room of executives, press, investors, and engineers. But I've spent enough of my life being quiet. There was a reason they called this emergency meeting. The prototype humanitarian drone, Halo 1, had gone missing in Haiti during a relief mission. No communication, no signal. The final test flight, their $400 million reputation, was on the line. And it was Dean's design. We lost signal because someone disabled its override beacon, he said, pointing at a small square on the photo. This chip was removed. The screen flickered. Security footage. A lab worker sneaking into the flight bay after hours. The crowd gasped. Dean turned to Claudia. We have a saboteur. Not just an error. Not just a crash. Someone wants us to fail. Why? One investor asked. We're saving lives. Dean looked at him. And you're cutting into your competitors' profits. That's why. Silence dropped like a brick. Claudia stood up. I've called for federal investigation already. We're cooperating fully. Another board member barked. And what do we tell the public if Halo 1 is found crashed? Burned? If those people die? Dean raised a hand. We don't wait to find it. We go get it. Someone scoffed. You mean you? I built it, Dean said. I know what it's capable of. If it's still in the air, I'll find it. Hours later, Dean stood at a private hangar. Sophie watched him gear up with a flight crew. You're going too? She asked, her voice small. Dean knelt down, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Remember what I told you about fear? She nodded, whispering, you only beat it by moving through it. He kissed her forehead. Exactly. Claudia approached, handing him a GPS transponder. We triangulated its last transmission. Remote hillside village. You'll need to parachute in. Dean strapped it on, just like old times. She touched his shoulder. Come back alive. 12 hours later, rain poured down in sheets as Dean hiked through dense brush, mud caking his boots, wind howling. His bones ached. He hadn't done this in years. But when he reached the clearing and saw it, he froze. There it was. Halo 1, perched on a flat rock. One blade damaged. Cameras still blinking. And 2 children sitting beneath its wing, wrapped in emergency blankets. They were alive. Their village had flooded days earlier. Dean's drone had landed exactly where it was supposed to. Autonomous stabilization, his own code, had saved them. Dean dropped to his knees, overcome. He called an extraction, held the kids close. They didn't speak his language, but they didn't need to. They knew he'd come for them. 3 days later, the company held a press conference. Dean refused to speak, but Claudia did. She announced the Walker Fund, a company-backed initiative to hire and train underprivileged single parents in tech fields. Then she called Dean up. "I've worked with engineers from 7 countries," she said, "but this man taught me the most. Not just about machines, about humanity." The room rose in applause. Dean said nothing, just nodded, a tear in his eye. Later that night, Dean stood on the rooftop of Renner HQ. Seattle below shimmered like a sea of stars. Sophie sat beside him, legs swinging off the bench. She held his old cafeteria lanyard. "You really used to wash dishes here?" He laughed softly. "Best decision I ever made." She looked up at him. "You didn't just fix the drone, Dad." He smiled. "What did I fix?" She leaned on his shoulder. "Everything." Fade out. In a building once too big for him, a man who was once overlooked stood at the top. Not because he wanted power, but because he knew how to use it with kindness. And somewhere, a napkin sketch still hung on a wall. Proof that greatness doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears stained shoes and walks in quietly. Until it speaks.